Hey, it's the PHNX Coyotes Podcast. Look at that. See, this is what happens when Leah's not here.
Yep.
I'm not ready. It's the PHNX Coyotes Podcast. Don't forget that like button, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and leave us a 5-star review. I'm Petey, along with Craig Morgan and Sean behind the Mac. But there is no Leah today.
Petey, are we live?
We are not live today.
Okay.
We're pretending it's Thursday. Happy Thursday to everyone. It's not. It's actually Wednesday. And the reason this is because half of this staff, and unfortunately not the cool part and the cool half of the staff, Craig and Leah are flying to Australia. And for some reason, people need to get prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, this is good practice, actually, not knowing which day it is for Australia.
It is.
So.
It is. I think you guys might be in Australia right now. I don't understand this time zone. It's like the Twilight Zone.
It's like your car. You have no idea where your car is.
That's a story.
That's another story.
We're going to get into that on Friday, by the way. That's a Friday story, not a Thursday story, even though it's Wednesday. So today, we thought with training camp literally upon us.
Thursday, even though it's Wednesday. Today.
Correct.
Got it.
And in Australia, it's Friday.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
But we thought camp is upon us, and we're talking about all of the wonderful players that are going to come out of this training camp, and some guys might make the team we're not expecting. We got Cooley against Keller, who's going to be the guy this year. So we thought it would be a great time to reflect and go back in the history of this franchise and come up with the best roster and the best players in Arizona Coyote history. This does not include the Jets. So Phil Housley, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're Dale Hawerchuk.
You're off. Steen.
Tomas Steen.
He's not there.
Nope.
So what we decided to do is come up with the list, Craig and I, and we excluded Leah because, well, she's not here.
Honestly, Leah didn't want any part of this.
No,
let's be honest.
She was born after most of these players played. So that's the concept. We're going to go through, and we're going to start with the forwards, and we'll start with the wrong set because we're going to start with Craig's list.
Here we go. As you can tell, there's going to be perfect harmony in these choices. So fine, we're just doing this. Okay, I'm going to go with my top line. I don't think anybody's going to argue with the top line of Keith Tkachuk, Jeremy Roenick, and Shane Doan.
No, I don't think there's going to be any dispute from any Coyote fan ever.
That part should be unanimous.
Yes.
Clayton Keller, I feel, has already risen to this level.
Even though he's an active player right now.
Yep, he's an active player, which is saying a lot. Clayton Keller has my second line left wing. And I put Danny Briere.
Kind of a shocking pick.
It was a shocking, but Sean likes it, obviously, because he went on to much greater stardom in Buffalo. Should have enjoyed that stardom here if they had seen what was coming with the NHL rule changes, which they should have seen coming, but that's another story, and I digress. At any rate, Danny Briere...
When you look at Danny, though, he's way down on the ultimate scoring, but he's 23rd in the all-time scoring list of Coyote forwards, or players, not forwards. How does he still crack?
Yeah,
your top
longevity matters. It's a factor here, right? I do consider it, but Danny Briere was breaking out. He was about to break out. He had that 60-point season with 32 goals in 2001, 2002. He was showing signs of being an elite center. So, of course, the Coyotes traded him because we know they don't like elite centers here in Arizona. So that's why he's on my list. And the guy on the right side, still, I think hardcore Coyotes fans understand just how much Radim Vrbata did here. He was incredibly productive, so much so here than in his other stops in his NHL career. For some reason, he just fit with the Coyotes. And of course, he had that incredible 35-goal season in 2011-12 when they went to the Western Conference Final.
It's funny when you talk about Radim Vrbata, he's a player that excelled here in this franchise. He had opportunities in Tampa. He played in other locations. He just didn't play like he did here. And he's fourth all-time in Arizona Coyote history in points. Like, he was such a valuable offensive tool, and he had some problems with some injuries and stuff through some of the playoff runs. But and when I say playoff runs, I mean playoff appearances, not runs. It's not a fair term. but he definitely belongs on this list, if not just for his shootout attempts and ability to add points to this team. Just by his shootout performance alone, he should be on this list.
Yep. We even call it now, when Christian Dvorak was doing it, we were calling it the reverse Radim. Yeah, because he's still one of the all-time leaders in shootout percentage in NHL
in the
history.
league history. Yeah.
Okay, jumping to the third line, another guy that his name's probably faded in Coyotes history a bit. I did a story on him a couple years ago. Can't even remember which outlet because they change so often. But Ladislav Nagy, you talk to the people that played with him, Shane Doan, Mike Johnson, any of the guys that were with him. Mike Johnson was on his line. they just talk about how incredibly skilled he was. And there were a couple seasons where you really saw it coming. He had the 57-point season in 02-03, and then unfortunately injuries shortened the 03-04 season, but he had 52 points in 55 games that season, 56 points in 51 the next season.
That's unreal.
Yeah, it's injuries really that derailed Laddie's career because this kid was incredibly skilled. You got to see him up.
He was a high-skilled guy that you thought was just about to break out, and he was a younger player. He played with Michael Handzus, his countryman and friend, for a long time, and they were a great duo on the ice. I thought he was the next great thing here for the Arizona Coyotes, and you're right. He had some severe injuries. He had he broke his wrist in St. Louis. Yeah. I was underneath the bleachers in the locker room, and I could hear him scream from the ice. It was that. It was so definitely loud and painful, but what a wonderful player this kid was. He was so good. He absolutely belongs on this list.
I know you're going to comment on the rest of my lineup at some point. Ray Whitney wasn't here for very long. Ray Whitney absolutely made an impact on this team. Again, we talked about that 11-12 team. He was on the top line with Marty Hansel and with Radim Vrbata. So I put both of those guys on this third line. Marty Hansel, to me, always was the perfect third line center. That's the role I thought he should have filled all along. They just didn't have the depth above him. But when you look at what he does, a really good defensive center could match up against the big centers in the Pacific Division at the time. A good face-off man, a guy who created space for his line mates, which he did so well for Vrbata and Whitney that year. He's my third line center. Ray Whitney, because of the two really good years he had, he climbed to the third line right wing for me. I don't know how you feel about this.
For Hansel's third in all-time games played in Arizona sweater. And to your point, when he was healthy, he was absolutely elite. And I think he is the guy that gets unnoticed in Coyotes history because of those injuries, and he was never able to put those
criticism
strings.
Because of those injuries. I mean, people called him man of glass, which, I mean, if you look at the game he played,
he played hard. He got to the net hard. He was a physical player. And so I think it's unfair to say those things, but as hindsight always does, if he could have stayed healthy and kept his core and his back in shape, I'm not sure where this guy would have ended up. I think he was so physically strong. He was big. He got to the net. He could kill penalties, but he could also be in the net front on the power play. He was a versatile guy that could play all sides of the puck. I think he absolutely belongs on this list. For Ray Whitney, if this was just the best players, Whitney's on the team.
Yeah.
The one thing that does is his knock. It's not a knock. It's reality. He just didn't play a lot of games here. Yep. He came here at the right time in the right mix with the right players to be. Without Ray Whitney, this team doesn't do what they do in 2012.
Yeah, no question.
Because he carries Vrbata and Hansel and makes them much better. So Ray Whitney on a standalone performance belongs on this list, but we'll get into longevity in a minute.
Yeah, and then my fourth line, you see another couple active Coyotes at this point. And listen, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. Coyotes history is not littered with superstars, right? Yeah. And you start looking at
this is not the Montreal Canadiens list.
No. And even if you look at teams that have been around the same amount of time, if you compare them to the Colorado Avalanche, for example, you're probably going to find a more star-studded lineup than you'll find for the Coyotes. So you have to take all that into account. But you and I were talking about constructing fourth lines and maybe constructing a fourth line that fit the role of a fourth line. Well, Damon Lenko, first of all, in the middle. Another guy who I think was really underrated in his career. Shane Doan will rave about this guy till the cows come home, and he knows something about cows. Damon Lenko was a terrific two-way center. He was surprisingly productive from a point standpoint as well, but he can fill this role perfectly to me. Lawson Krause, of course, big body who can move well, is responsible defensively. And then I figured, you know what? I'm not going to complete this by having it be an entirely defensive line. I'm going to give them some spark on this line so they can create offense. So with what Nick Schmaltz has done the past couple of seasons, nearly a point per game player, I made him my fourth line right wing.
It's interesting because you did go with more current guys. And the Nick Schmaltz one, to me, we've talked about parts of his game. He is 12th all time in scoring by anybody that's ever put on a sweater here in Arizona. So does he belong in the top 12 forwards? We'll see how that ends up. But I don't have a problem with there. Damon Lenkow is an interesting one because Lenkow, if you think of the top 12 forwards of all time in this franchise and you go, Damon Lenkow? Really? Like, does he belong on the list? The answer, he's 13th in scoring all time, but he gives you something that most of the players on this list don't do. He's got that dig in, grit, bite, that side of the game that I think you need to be successful. So I agree with Damon Lenkow on this list. Can you tell us your extra forward?
Well, there they are right on the screen for you. Dallas Drake. who we saw yesterday, actually.
We did. I didn't recognize him.
Yeah,
he just came out of the mountains and the bush.
Dally Drake was he was a grinder, right? He got to play with some good players on occasion, which probably helped his career a little bit. But he's a guy that gave you a lot. Gave you maximum effort at all times. He was a responsible two-way player. So I figured he deserves a spot here. Craig Janney, I know you love Craig Janney. He was an incredibly skilled guy. I thought his production level when he got to Arizona was a little too low to put him in my top 12, but he certainly deserves a mention. And then Mikkel Bodker, who had some good seasons. I know they had hoped that he would take the next step. I remember when Newell Brown put him on the power play, and they were trying to make him more of a focal point of this team, and he never just quite rose to that next level where they thought he could be a star player. But he was a productive player for the Coyotes, certainly a skill player. I think they used to call him Quadzilla, right?
Yeah, his legs were massive. They were literally tree trunks. When you saw him in a pair of shorts, you're like, buddy, how do you walk in those things? Like, they were massive. Like, he was so strong on his skates. And
it helped him in corners and things like that.
And his speed was elite. And you saw what he did in the 2012 playoffs. He literally pushed the team over the mountain with 2 overtime goals against Chicago.
Yep.
So I don't have a problem with that. But let's go up to Petey's forwards here. And these are the right pairs now. Now, the same top line, Tkachuk, Roenick, Doan, we're all in agreement. I don't see any change. Second line, I kept Keller and Verbaat on the second line, but I did put Craig Janney there. And Craig Janney's numbers are not elite. He was limited also by his ability to play games here. He didn't play a lot of games as a Coyote. But what he did do at that time when this team was just getting here to the Valley, he made Keith Tkachuk better. He was the guy that Keith Tkachuk always said, just get me the puck. Mm-hmm. And that's rule number 1. Well, Craig Janney understood the rule.
Yeah, and rule number 2 was?
Don't forget rule number 1.
Yep.
And Craig Janney knew the rule, and he fed him the puck. And he was such a versatile centerman that didn't always get the glory because of what Keith Tkachuk and Jeremy Roenick were doing at the time. But I got Craig Janney on the second line. My third line, surprisingly, Nagy, Hansel, Whitney, stays the same. I agreed with Whitney. Even though he had played few games, he was such an important piece to this playoff run, and his off-ice and on-ice both made this team better. The fourth line is where we jumped a little bit. I did punish Lawson Crouse for not being... He's still active and still current. So I put Dally Drake in this because if you haven't seen Dallas Drake highlights, my goodness, you need to. Because you know how Tom Wilson right now, when he's on the ice, everybody knows it. When Dallas Drake was on the ice, buddy, you knew it. Like, he was scary out there. Like, he was physical. It wasn't as big as Tom Wilson, but man, could he hit. He was such a physical presence on the ice, and he played maybe a little bit on the side of dirty. But it was a player you want on your team, especially on your fourth line, because he was also a good character presence guy in the locker room. And on the other side, a name we haven't mentioned yet was Mike Johnson.
He's literally the next guy on my list. Yeah,
like
and that's a tough one for me.
Mike Johnson, it's funny because he was, at one point, he was the most valuable player on this team. Yeah. Like when he was playing with Langkow and Nagy. Like, Johnson was a very gifted guy here. He played a lot of his career in Toronto, but here in the desert, he was exceptionally good. Like, he was very good and kind of a forgotten player. So I put him in that list. And then on my extra line, I've got Crouse and Bodker, just like you. But in the middle, I threw in a surprise pick. I threw in Antoine Vermette, a guy that could take faceoffs, well-loved in the locker room. And I always tip my hat to 2012. So that's my forward list. And you know where you could watch those if they were playing back then? If it existed back then, you could watch all those games on Fubo TV, because Fubo TV is the go-to.
Transition.
Fubo TV is your go-to for all things streaming and streaming television. That's Fubo, Fubo. Watch all your favorite college football because they've got college football on there. So you can watch your favorite college football. Watch NFL. Why? Because the NFL is on Fubo. Go to www.FuboTV.com/ and this is important, PHNX. That's www.FuboTV.com/PHNX to sign up for 15% off your first month of Fubo Pro. And this is what I think Craig did when he compiled this list. He was on his OGs because he is clearly out of his, just a little bit too chill for making his list. But we all enjoy our OGs around here, and it's all about the flavors with OGs and their gummies because their flavors are elite. And now you can buy those in a multi-flavor pack, so you can get all your favors in one place with OGs. And I tell you what, since my CBD THC journey, OGs is included in that. And I have to say, big thumbs up to my OGs. Check out our friends at OGs Brands for yourself. Try one or a few of their many delicious flavors. Check them out across all social medias at OGs Brands. That's OGEEZ for you Canadian listeners. And online at ogsbrands.com to find them at local dispensary near you. You must be 21 or older to enjoy. Let's go right to Craig's defenseman.
Okay.
But I think we're probably going to, because this list is so much shorter.
Yeah.
So I think that we're going to have more in common here, but you never know. So let's hit your defenseman.
We're probably going to agree on the top pairing anyway, with Keith Yandle and Teppo Newman in there. Yeah. Teppo Newman and the Repo Man.
The Repo Man.
Yep.
I put him as the number one defenseman here all the time. Sorry. And I know Keith Yandle offensively can have something to say about that. Teppo Newman, and unbelievable.
Smooth. Just smooth everywhere on the ice. Dependable. And a captain, one of the captains of this franchise as well. So I don't think there's much argument there. And I think those guys pair well together. Teppo could protect Keith, right? He could protect his riverboat gambler style that Shane Doan described it as. On my second pair, speaking of protecting guys, this would allow OEL to play a little more offense. I have Oliver Ekman-Larsson and then Zbynek McCulloch on my second pair.
Z.
I moved him all the way up to the second pair. You look at the games played. Z's among the leaders in this franchise in games played. He was here a couple different times, obviously, and for a long time, just a defensive stalwart and a guy who sacrificed his body.
Yeah.
My God, he sacrificed.
Elite warrior.
Yeah.
Craig, I will say this. Of all the players that have ever played here, no one, and I mean no one, and that's from the day they got to the Valley until currently, that sacrificed their body and played with injuries more than Zbynek McCulloch. And you know what? Never said a word. This kid was he led by example. He kept his mouth shut. He'd barely be in the training room. He played with a broken foot.
Yep. I remember that.
What a warrior.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Remember the interviews without his teeth.
He's still in the Valley, by the way. We'll have to get a chance to talk to him soon.
He's a really good man.
And then my third pair?
My third pair, I got Jovo, who was here for some key years.
The Jovo cop.
Yeah, he was a stalwart defenseman. Obviously, his best years were elsewhere, but he was still a very good defenseman, and I like his role here where you could limit his minutes at this point in his career. And I've got the hammer alongside of him, Niklas Hjalmarsson, who is still the best defensive defenseman that I have ever watched in my life. Obviously, again, a lot of those years came in Chicago, but when he first got here, he was still elite defensively. The way he suppressed shots and the way he played in the defensive zone, you just don't see many players with that sort of ability.
Yeah, and I think with Hammer, don't tell Rick Tocchet because he didn't like the way he moved the puck up the ice. But Hammer is one of those in the Zbynek McCulloch mode that I think you don't win without players like that.
Yep, I agree. I know how important he was to the Blackhawks 3 Cups.
And your extra pair.
Yep. I've got Jyrki Lumme, who I know you're going to talk about a little bit more, and then Debo, Derek Morris on the pair, who is also in the Valley. Doesn't talk to us much. But
well, he said he wouldn't talk to us.
No, he did. He's told us on breakup day. Yep.
Yeah, but Derek Morris is an interesting guy, and we'll get to it. Let's go to Petey's defenseman to see what that list looks like. And I agree with you. Yandle and Newman. And Teppo Newman is the smoothest defenseman this franchise has ever had in his ability to skate, come out of the corner with pucks, get pucks up the ice, and also even play an offensive role. He is the number one defenseman as a captain in this franchise. Teppo Newman and Keith Yandle, elite. We know what he is. OEL, we've seen him. I put Jyrki Lumme on my second pair, and I know he's kind of one of those forgotten defensemen because even though he was a little more slight, he could defend. Like he was a really good with the stick. He was good on both ends of the ice. I think his personality was great. Guys like playing with him, for him, and around him. I've got Jyrki Lumme in my top pair, and I've got my third pair the same as yours, Jovo and Niklas Hjalmarsson, and with Ed Jovanovski, that guy competed. And hey, I'm the first guy to sit here and say, defensively, man, he made some errors and bad reads, but it wasn't because of lack of effort. Man, when he was a bull at times. When you got his ire up, look out, because he could be dangerous. He was a bigger guy.
He was a big man.
And he could be more physical than people gave him credit for, even with his offensive skills. And in my extra pair, I cheated a little bit. I gave 3. Because those are guys I couldn't leave off. I couldn't leave off Mo and Z, but for Z for all the things you mentioned. And I added a third one. I thought Jacob Chikrin, even though there's a little bad taste in my mouth right now for the way he left the organization, when you look at the points and what he was able to do in his brief stint here, even with the injuries, I think Jacob Chikrin belonged on that list. So I added an extra.
Yeah, you cheated. So you cheated.
So it's illegal.
Okay. Yeah.
And my name is Pete. So that would be Illegal Pete's. So when you're looking for a snack, you got to go to Illegal Pete's. Illegal Pete's, but we've always talked about Illegal Pete's. Why do I like Illegal Pete's? Because I don't like to wait for things. Illegal Pete's, I walk in, I get my food, I'm sitting at the bar, I'm watching sports in minutes. Phenomenal food, phenomenal drinks at the bar watching sports in minutes.
There's so much on that menu. Like I keep exploring. Like I love their bowls, love their queso. We get their food here all the time.
Oh, I misheard you. Sorry.
I don't even want to know what you thought you heard. We'll keep that to ourselves. But that, you know what I've been doing lately? Like with their meats, they bring our meats in. I'm like, okay, I'm going to just lay out a tray of chips,
And try
Pour those meats over the top. Get
Really?
some salsa and guacamole.
Creative.
I've got my nachos
And
right
you can
there.
do that. You can be creative like
Oh,
that there?
buddy.
They let
Yeah,
you be
you can.
creative?
You can do anything. And someone literally said that to me one time when I was asking him, like, hey, could I do it? We can do whatever you want.
Well, with Leah
Okay.
not here, we don't have to talk about the queso. So that's good. But Illegal Pizza is your go-to spot this summer. Stop by for happy hour from 3 to 8 p.m. every day at all 12 locations. Illegal Pizza, the go-to spot for burritos, buddies, and beer for 28 years. Illegal Pete's. And next, Shady Rays. We talk about Shady Rays, and I sincerely tried to sell these to Nick Bugstead, and he said, "Well, I don't like to spend a lot of money on myself." I said, "Buddy, Shady Rays is your go-to. You can have a different pair for every suit." But his suit game's not very good either. You should say that to
Okay, taking abuse.
I know.
Right
Well, he's
now.
not here. Well, he's probably listening though. But some of those guys, they need a pair of glasses with every suit. What better place to go than Shady Rays because they have such a large selection. You can match every single suit with your Shady Rays. They're exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Go to shadyrays.com and use the code, what?
PHNX.
Of course. The code is PHNX for 50% off 2+ pairs of polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades, rated 5 stars by over 250,002 people. Now, the most important position on the ice, let's get to Craig's goalies. And on the same slide, I'm going to throw our coaching staff. So it's goalies and coaches on the same slide.
I'm just gonna say this right out off the top. This was really hard.
This is the hardest position because the Arizona Coyotes, we've said this, they've had really good goalies over time.
And you can only pick 3 on the list,
Yeah.
and one of them's an extra guy. Like I think you and I agree on this because we both got the opportunity to watch Nikolai Hobibulin literally at the peak of his career. He was in his prime. And unfortunately, the holdout and then the trade, it's too bad. I would have liked to have seen what he could have done with more longevity. He obviously won a cup eventually in Tampa Bay, but that season before he was gone, he was so good.
And this team, he might have got over Detroit that year, but he gets hurt, and Jimmy Waite had to close the gate, and he didn't.
So in spite of all the considerable accomplishments of multiple other goaltenders, I have Nikolai Hobibulin, and I stayed old school with my backup.
Wow.
I don't think people realize how good Sean Burke was when he was here.
Yeah.
I believe he finished 4th in Hart Trophy voting one year.
And MVP for the league.
For the league.
In the league.
That's how good
Not on
he
his
was.
team, in the league.
He was carrying this team.
Yeah.
He was that good. Those are my 2 guys, but man, you can make an argument for multiple other guys. I've got Mike Smith, crazy enough, as my 3rd goaltender. This is a guy who produced one of the best postseasons in NHL history. His save percentage was like .930 plus in that postseason. He was ridiculous. He was the reason they beat the Blackhawks. Without question, and literally every Coyote on that roster will tell you that he beat the Blackhawks. Didn't have to do quite as much in Nashville, but he was ridiculous down the stretch when they won the Pacific Division, and then they went on the only playoff run of the entire franchise's history.
I agree. I agree with all these, and we'll talk a little more goaltending in the next slide. But what about your coaches?
My coaches? I mean, Tip oversaw the best run in Coyotes history. Yeah. They made the playoffs 3 straight seasons. They went to the Western Conference Final. I don't know how you argue with that. And you set the rules for the assistants. I knew I couldn't pick head coaches as assistants.
Couldn't pick head coaches as assistants. So sorry, Bear.
I think people forget John Tortorella was an assistant here.
The John Tortorella.
The John Tortorella. Still learning the ropes at that time, but I mean, obviously was building himself into a coach that a lot of teams eventually chased. He's been the head coach in multiple spots, and he earned his stripes here. He was a terrific assistant coach here. Also a really personable guy. I keep saying this because people are like, Torts is an asshole. And you know what? Sometimes he is. But when you get one-on-one with this guy, it's like you're talking to your favorite uncle.
Well, the persona of John Tortorella hadn't been born yet. Meaning he wasn't the guy that you see on TV and the media then. Jim Schoenfeld was that guy. Yeah. He was the guy, eat your donuts, yelling at the Karski, the referee. Yeah. Tortorella was the good cop to the bad cop of Jim Schoenfeld. So he was a fantastic coach. And also remember at that time, there was only one real head assistant coach. Yeah. Gordy Roberts was there, but they were a role now of what you see lower down in the coaching depths then. So there was a lot on Tortorella's plate. I mean, there were 2 guys on the bench, and there was a lot for him to do, and I think he fits there. And who's the second guy you had on your list?
Yep. Newell Brown, who oversaw the best run of power play, I think, in Coyotes history. Yeah. He's a power play phenom, right? And you think about what he did it without great personnel. Yes. Yeah. They did not have the personnel to be an elite power play unit, yet he made it happen. Newell Brown is a student of the game. This is a guy who studies the game so much.
Yeah, and you look at when he was at Anaheim, he had Pronger and Niedermeyer and those guys on his power play. Yeah, and Teemu Selanne. Right. And he comes here and guess what? Didn't have those guys. So I agree that's what made him better. Let's go to my list of goalies. And this, as Craig mentioned, this is hard. So I put Nikolai Habibulin. I didn't have Mike Smith on my original list. And then I started looking through numbers and what he did in that playoff run. His goals against average, career playoff goals against average for the Arizona Coyotes is 1.99. Like that is phenomenal.
It's absurd.
And so I had to vault him into that. But in that same list, all-time wins for goalies is Ilya Brzgalov. And none of us have him on our list.
Yeah. We don't have Darcy Kemper on here
Darcy
either.
Kemper. He finishes tops in top 3 in almost every category, including save percentage. He's second behind Ranta. You talk about players like Curtis Joseph was here. Antti Ranta was here. Brian Boucher got 5 shutouts in a row to set a record that I don't think is ever going to get broken in the National Hockey League. Not on the list.
Yep.
I also put Sean Burke. We have the same 3 goalies, just in a little different order. And the only reason Mike Smith jumped up to me is because he played the best when he needed to play his best and put this team on his back for that playoff run in 2012. For the coaches, again, I went right with you. Dave Tippett, Tortorella, and Brown. And I threw in Rick Tocchet because he did so many things with this coaching staff. I did. It's fair.
Okay.
I can do what I want to. Because Rick Tocchet, he as an assistant coach, not as a head coach, but as an assistant coach under Wayne Gretzky was coaching for the first time.
Yep.
And I think that Rick Tocchet helped to guide him in a direction. Can we throw up the list of honorable mentions too? Just some of the names. Did you get that list? Okay. There was another list of the rest of the best, and I might not have sent it to you, but there's some other names that I think that we should mention just because, Craig, and we don't have to put them on the screen, but there's some other guys that came up when we talked about the goalies, Brzgalov, Kemper, Joseph, Ranta, and Boucher, but a couple of the defensemen I think that go long-term Coyotes. You talk about Goligoski and what he did, and he made the people around him better. Yeah. I don't think he belongs on the all-time team, but he made people better, and you go way back to Oleg Tverdovsky. When they first came to the Valley, man, he was the real deal. Gets traded for Solani and coming over to the Valley. So I think he's a name we need to mention. Anybody on the forward group jump out for you, Craig?
Yeah, I'm looking. I mean, Max Domi was a very promising forward when he first came up. Obviously, he's moved a lot since then, but he was emerging as we thought one of the stars of the future of this franchise. So probably deserves some mention.
Well, there's the list. We got the list up now. If you're watching,
Peter Mueller had a ridiculous rookie season.
If Peter Mueller continues where he was,
stays healthy.
He stays healthy. Yeah. He might be on the all-time list. Like his number of points in such a short period of time, he potentially could have been on that list of top players all time.
Yeah. I don't know. Rick Tocchet too.
Rick Tocchet, we didn't mention. The old school guys that didn't make this list were Rick Tocchet and Cliff Ronning. I look back at what they did for this team when they were really good, and I thought a piece or two away from making a real run. Unfortunately, they just didn't put it all together against the St. Louis Blues in the playoffs. But those are some of the names that some coaches I need to mention because I worked with them. I ran into Jim Schoenfeld at the ice den yesterday. My God, does he look good? And he's still scary. He's a big, scary man. And then the list of assistants. You've interviewed him. You've been around him. Not just good coaches, but good people. Bonus, Al Samuelson, Scotty Allen, Johnny McLean. And Pat Conacher, I will tell this to Pat Conacher, who might be a forgotten assistant coach here, pulled me aside early in my career. I vividly remember we were in Toronto, pulled me into the room. He said, "You're young. You need to make a choice. Do you want to have fun or do you want to work in the National Hockey League?" He said, "You need to make a choice." And it was after a Friday night in Toronto. Let the rest of the story unfold from there. But I made a choice. I should probably try to work and make my way.
2 names on there on the coaching list that I had a hard time with. Rick Bowness, obviously, who's gone on to do a lot of things, has been a head coach in the NHL as well. And I think is a terrific coach and had to take over at some point for Bobby Francis as well. And then Dave King, whose knowledge of the game, right? And this is a guy who's got international experience, international knowledge. He understands the culture of hockey in multiple nations. He coached over in Russia for a while. Another guy that I just love to talk to about the game. So those would be 2 more names that I would want to mention.
Well, and it's time for Jack Adams. They've had 2 Jack Adams winners here in Arizona. If you want to bet on the preseason MGM, you need to go to BetMGM, and you need to sign up for the BetMGM app. I call it my magic money maker. So I don't call it MGM, I call it MMM. Because I fire in college football. But don't forget, we talk about all the time, you can't win if you don't play. So download the BetMGM app. You don't have to spend what you can't spend. Just do Leo Weenie bets on the BetMGM app. Use bonus code PHNX when you download it. Very important, PHNX when you download it. Place your first bet on the BetMGM Sportsbook wager through BetMGM Sportsbook mobile application of at least $10, and you'll receive $200 instantly in additional winnings regardless of your wager's outcome. Check the show notes for full details. And now, listen to Shane talk about the disclaimer.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Colorado, D.C., Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, New Jersey, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Wyoming. Call 877-8-HOPENY or text HOPENY 467-369 New York. Call 1-800-327-5050 Massachusetts. 21 plus to wager. Please gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP Arizona. 1-800-BETS-OFF Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 Puerto Rico in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., New York, or Ontario.
And Craig alluded to it that I'm having a little problem with my navigation system inside my car, so my maps aren't actually telling me where I'm at, but it doesn't matter because there are Circle Ks everywhere. I don't need a map to find one. I just need to drive, and there will be one there, along with my Polar Pops and the cups that don't sweat and the snacks that we talk about, my orange slices that are still juicy and maybe contain vitamin C. Actually, they don't. Sorry, it's a snack. Join the Circle K Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit CircleK.com for details. And with that Inner Circle, you get discounts on gas. It's an amazing app. Download it right now. Become part of the Circle K Inner Circle. I know both of us have. Craig, we want to talk about what you have coming up on at PHNX.
I was going to say, speaking of things that people should become a part of, they should become a part of the PHNX community because we have so much exclusive content. You've seen the litany of content that Petey's been rolling out lately. On the Ice with Clayton Keller recently, that was an incredibly popular piece. On the heels of some other popular pieces as well. Petey does town halls in our Discord. We have exclusive content. We have merch. We have so much for you if you become a diehard, but join the community. Give us a taste. You can just go to the website and read some of the free content that we have. I've got a piece up right now, a Q&A with Andrew Ladd, who announced his retirement earlier this week. We knew it was coming. His contract with the Coyotes had run out, but I talked to him a lot about the work he's doing with kids. It's such important work. I don't do these kinds of stories a lot, Petey, but when it's so clear that a guy is all in on it, it's deeply personal and it's so important to him, that's the time. And then I look at the type of work he's doing. It's so important to teach these kids how to manage the mental side of the game, how to get through all the problems in their life. Teach them early so that they can navigate that. That's what Andrew Ladd's doing. So really encourage you to go read that.
Yep, and find all this at gophnx.com. Become a part, become a diehard, become a part of this great community. That's it for this crazy Thursday. We took a step back in time, and go ahead and drop it in the Discord if you're a diehard what you think the all-time Coyotes roster should look like. Leave comments here on the YouTube channel. Let us know who you have. Yeah, and who's better. We'll tweet both lists out so you can comment on all of our social medias. You can follow us at PHNX_Coyotes. You can follow me at SPetersHockey, at Craig S. Morgan, at Sean_DePaz, behind the Mac as always. Thanks for joining us today. Catch us every day live on the PHNX YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on PHNX.